You want to know why we're so afraid of those? Human's chief science officer Keith Thorax lazily swirled his tentacles in his relaxation pod, the bioluminescent liquid casting an eerie green glow across his crystalline exoskeleton. His companion, junior researcher Vex Laura, bobbed eagerly in her hover chair. Oh, come on. They're basically hairless primates who barely made it off their rock. What's so terrifying about them? Vex Laura's antenna twitched with barely contained excitement. Fresh out of the Galactic Academy, she had that irritating enthusiasm that made Keith Thorax feel every one of his 387 cycles. Ha! Keith Thorax's laugh came out as a series of clicking sounds. That's exactly what Ambassador Pete Thulu said before. The incident. He paused dramatically, watching with satisfaction as Vex Laura's scales shifted from their usual azure to a pale lavender, the universal sign of curiosity among the Zentarians. What incident? There's nothing in the official archives about any major human incidents. Her hover chair drifted closer, completely forgetting proper protocol about personal space bubbles. Of course not, Keith Thorax chittered. The council buried it deeper than a Morgaxian dust worm. But I was there. I saw everything. He pulled himself up from his relaxation pod, his exoskeleton crackling with the static electricity of remembered terror. It all started during the Standard Cycle 3472, at the annual Galactic Sciences Conference on Proxima Station. We were showcasing our latest achievements in genetic engineering, the usual boring stuff. Creating better food sources, curing diseases, designing more efficient waste recyclers. Vex Laura's antennae drooped slightly. That doesn't sound very terrifying. Oh, just wait. Keith Thorax's secondary eyes glowed with remembered intensity. Everything changed when Dr. Helena Rodriguez and her team showed up. A human scientist? But humans weren't even part of the Galactic Council then. Exactly. They were there as observers. Keith Thorax's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smirk among his species. The council thought it would be a good gesture of goodwill, showing the humans how advanced we were, maybe convince them to share some of their peculiar innovations. You see, humans had this fascinating habit of solving problems in the most bizarre, roundabout ways possible. He paused to activate his memory crystal, projecting a hologram of a tall human female with dark curly hair tied back in what humans called a ponytail, a rather disturbing name, considering they didn't actually have tails. Dr. Rodriguez was brilliant, even by human standards, while we were showing off our carefully crafted genetic solutions. She was taking notes with this ancient technology called a pencil, literally crushed carbon deposits on processed tree pulp. Can you believe it? But her eyes were doing that thing humans do when they're having what they call ideas. Vex Laura leaned forward, her scales now shifting to a deep indigo of fascination. What happened next? Well, during the presentation of the grand solution to the Morgaxian plague, the one that was devastating their agricultural colonies, Dr. Rodriguez raised her hand. Now, you have to understand. This plague had stumped our best minds for decades. We'd spent countless resources trying to engineer a virus that could counter it. Keith Thorax's voice dropped to a whisper, forcing Vex Laura to drift even closer. She asked, and I quote, "Have you guys tried spicy food?" Spicy food. Yes, apparently humans had engineered their food to cause pain when they eat it. For fun. They called it capsaicin, a chemical compound that literally triggers pain receptors. And Dr. Rodriguez had noticed that the molecular structure was similar to the Morgaxian plague's weak points. Keith Thorax's exoskeleton shuddered. But that was just the beginning. When we explained that we couldn't possibly introduce such a dangerous compound into a food supply, she just laughed. That terrible human laugh that shows all their teeth. Did you know they're the only species that shows their bone protrusions as a sign of friendship? Terrifying. The next day, she came back with something even worse. She called it hot sauce, some kind of human chemical warfare agent that they willingly put in their food. But here's the truly horrifying part. It worked. One application of this hot sauce killed 99.9% of the plague bacteria. The remaining 0.1% probably died of shock. Vex Laura's scales had shifted to the white of disbelief. But that's good, isn't it? They solved the problem. Oh, my naive young researcher. Keith Thorax's tentacles wrapped around his relaxation pod's edge. That was just the first day of a week-long conference. You haven't heard about what happened when they learned about our energy crisis, or when Dr. Rodriguez's assistant, Marcus Chen, got his hands on our artificial gravity generators. or worst of all, when they introduced us to something they called coffee. The memory crystal flickered, showing scenes of chaos scientists running in panic, experimental equipment exploding in surprisingly colorful ways, and humans everywhere, grinning those bone-showing grins while solving supposedly impossible problems with solutions that defied all logical sense. But if you really want to know why the council classified everything about that week, K-Thorax continued, his voice dropping even lower, I'll tell you about the final day. The day we learned why humans are the only species in the known galaxy that still maintains what they call action movies. Action. Movies. Vex Laura's scales rippled with a mixture of confusion and anticipation, creating a mesmerizing pattern of turquoise swirls. You mean those primitive entertainment simulations where humans pretend to explode things? K-Thorax's bioluminescent spots pulsed with what could only be described as traumatic remembrance. Oh, if only it were that simple. But let me tell you about what happened on day 3 first. You see, after the hot sauce incident, the council thought they had everything under control. They assigned additional security measures, installed extra safety protocols, and even implemented a new rule requiring all human suggestions to go through 17 layers of bureaucratic approval. He paused, his tentacles writhing in agitation. They didn't account for human boredom. The memory crystal flickered again, showing a different human, a shorter male with spiky black hair and what appeared to be decorative circles around his eyes. Marcus Chen, Dr. Rodriguez's assistant. While everyone was distracted by Helena's increasingly concerning solutions to our genetic engineering problems, Marcus had grown restless. You see, humans have this peculiar inability to sit still when they're not actively causing chaos. They call it fidgeting. Vex Laura's antennae perked up. Oh, I read about that in xenobiology class. It's a symptom of their extremely inefficient energy processing system, right? That's what we thought too. K-Thorax clicked his mandibles in frustration. But no, they do it because they're thinking. And Marcus? He was thinking about our artificial gravity generators. The hologram shifted to show the Proxima Station's main research hub. You have to understand, our gravity technology was perfect, elegant, refined over thousands of cycles to provide precise gravitational control using minimal energy. Marcus took one look at it and said, and I quote, neat. But what if we made it go whoosh? Whoosh. Vex Laura's translation implant struggled with the word. It's a human onomatopoeia, a sound word they use when. Actually, never mind. The point is, while we were all focused on maintaining proper safety protocols, Marcus had somehow convinced junior engineer T. Laxak that our gravity generators could be improved by adding something he called momentum conservation. K-Thorax's exoskeleton rattled with remembered anxiety. Do you know what happens when you combine variable gravity fields with momentum conservation? Neither did we. Turns out you can create what humans call a gravity slingshot effect. One moment, everything was normal. The next, we had researchers literally bouncing off the walls. The hologram showed chaos in perfect clarity, dignified scientists of various species ricocheting around the research hub like particles in a quantum accelerator, while Marcus stood in the center, somehow maintaining perfect stability, grinning that terrifying human grin and shouting parkour. But that wasn't even the worst part. K-Thorax continued, his voice dropping to a horrified whisper. The humans. They were having fun. Dr. Rodriguez actually suggested we turn the entire incident into something called an extreme sport. She said it would be, and I quote, totally radical. Vex Laura's hover chair wobbled slightly. Surely the council stepped in. Oh, they tried. They issued an immediate ban on all human-inspired improvements, but by then it was too late. Word had spread about the gravity games. And suddenly we had humans from all over the station submitting safety recommendations that were thinly veiled attempts to recreate the incident. The memory crystal showed a series of increasingly chaotic scenes, humans teaching various alien species something called wall running, impromptu zero-gravity dance competitions, and what appeared to be an entirely new sport involving gravity fluctuations and something the humans called hacky sacks. And then came the coffee incident. K-Thorax's bioluminescent spots dimmed to a barely visible glow. Did you know that humans regularly consume a neurotoxin just to make their brains work faster? They call it caffeine. But that wasn't enough for them. No, they had to turn it into an art form. The hologram shifted to show the station's nutrition center. Dr. Rodriguez introduced her personal supply of something called espresso to the station's atmospheric scientist, Dr. Quantum Ph. Zeitz. Now, You have to understand quantum was already eccentric by gaseous being standards, adding concentrated caffeine to his molecular structure. What happened? Vex Laura was practically vibrating with anticipation. He achieved sentience in 17 different quantum states simultaneously, started solving equations that hadn't even been written yet, began theorizing about dimensions that mathematically couldn't exist except they did, because he was partly existing in them while high on human bean juice. K-Therax's tentacles wrapped around themselves in distress. The council had to quarantine the entire physics department for 3 days while they waited for the caffeine to dissipate from Dr. PHZ's gaseous form. By the time he returned to normal spacetime, he'd revolutionized quantum mechanics and left a series of equations that still give our best mathematicians nightmares. But you mentioned something about action movies, Vex Laura prompted, her scales now cycling through colors faster than a malfunctioning spectrum analyzer. Ah yes, K-Therax's voice took on an almost reverent tone of horror. That was the final day. The day we learned why letting humans watch explosion-based entertainment for their entire evolutionary history might have been a slight miscalculation on the universe's part. The final day of the conference. K-Therax continued, his bioluminescent spots pulsing with an almost hypnotic rhythm of remembered chaos, began with what humans call a movie night, though it happened during standard daylight hours, which is just another example of their puzzling relationship with accurate terminology. But why would watching entertainment simulations cause such concern? Vex Laura's antennae twisted into the Zentarian equivalent of a raised eyebrow. Because, my naive young researcher, the humans didn't just watch their action movies. They learned from them. K-Therax's mandibles clicked rapidly in distress. The showing was supposed to be a cultural exchange. Something called Die Hard, a title that makes absolutely no sense since the protagonist clearly lives through the entire simulation. The memory crystal flickered to life again, showing a large gathering of various species in the station's main auditorium. Do you know what happens when you show a room full of the galaxy's brightest scientific minds a human entertainment product specifically designed to showcase improbable solutions to life-threatening situations? They analyze its scientific inaccuracies, Vex Laura suggested hopefully. Hey, K-Therax's laugh echoed through the chamber like shattering crystal. If only. No, they started taking notes. Dr. Rodriguez and her team had somehow managed to convince everyone that these action movies were actually human training documentaries, educational materials about emergency problem solving. The hologram showed various alien scientists scribbling frantically while watching scenes of explosions and improbable physics. By the time we reached the scene where the human protagonist improvises an explosive device from cleaning supplies, 3 different chemical engineering teams had already submitted research proposals. The Pyroxians were particularly interested in something called duct tape, apparently. Humans can fix anything with it. But surely the council recognized. The council. K-Therax interrupted, his tentacles wrapping themselves into stress knots, was too busy dealing with the fact that Dr. PHZZ, still slightly caffeinated and existing in multiple quantum states, had begun theorizing about the practical applications of action movie physics to our existing technologies. The memory crystal displayed a chaotic scene, a gaseous being, glowing with unusual energy patterns, rapidly expanding and contracting while projecting complex mathematical equations into the air. He called it the rule of cool, a theoretical framework suggesting that the probability of success for any given action increases proportionally with its visual impressiveness and inverse relationship to common sense. That can't possibly work, Vex Laura protested, her scales shifting to the deep purple of scientific skepticism. That's exactly what we thought. Until Marcus Chen decided to test the theory. K-Therax's exoskeleton shuddered so violently his relaxation pod rippled. Remember the gravity generators he'd modified? Well, he combined that technology with something he called video game logic and K-Therax had to pause, taking a moment to compose himself while his bioluminescent spots flickered erratically. He turned the entire research wing into what he called a speedrunning challenge. Scientists were literally wall running through the corridors, using momentum conservation to break the laws of physics, all while Dr. PHZ's equations actually validated their success rate. The hologram showed scenes that defied explanation, dignified researchers of various species sliding under closing security doors, performing acrobatic maneuvers through gravity-altered zones, and using laboratory equipment in ways that violated at least 17 safety protocols and possibly several laws of physics. But the real crisis came when Dr. Rodriguez, who had apparently been saving the best for last, introduced something she called MacGyver episodes to the engineering department. Kate Thorax's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. Do you know what happens when you show beings with advanced degrees in quantum mechanics and artificial intelligence how to improvise solutions using primitive tools and random objects? Vex Laura's hover chair drifted backward slightly. I'm not sure I want to know. Chaos. Beautiful, terrible chaos. Kate Thorax's tentacles gesticulated wildly. Within hours, the entire station had been transformed into what the humans called an awesome obstacle course. The hydroponics lab became a swinging vine challenge. Don't ask me where they got the vines. The quantum computing center was repurposed into something called a boss fight arena, and the cafeteria. Oh, the cafeteria. The cafeteria, Kate Thorax continued, his voice trembling, became ground zero for what humans call food fights, though calling it a fight is like calling a supernova a warm day. The memory crystal projected a scene that could only be described as orchestrated culinary warfare. It started when Marcus Chen discovered that our molecular gastronomy station could be reprogrammed to create something he called pizza dough projectiles. Dr. Rodriguez, meanwhile, had somehow weaponized the salad bar's anti-gravity freshness field into what she termed a vegetable velocity enhancer. Vex Laura's scales shifted to a fascinating mix of horror and amusement. Surely the station's safety protocols. Safety protocols, Kate Thorax interrupted with a sound that might have been either a laugh or a sob. The humans had convinced our AI safety system that it was participating in something called team-building exercises. The system actually started keeping score. The hologram showed various scenes of increasing madness: dignified xenobiologists using sonic food warmers as improvised sound cannons, quantum physicists calculating optimal trajectories for launch dinner rolls, and a group of biochemists who had somehow turned the dessert synthesizer into what they called a pudding catapult. But here's the truly terrifying part: Kate Thorax's bioluminescent spots pulsed with remembered amazement. Everything they did worked. Not just worked, it worked better than our original systems. The reprogrammed food synthesizers were producing meals with 43% higher nutrient efficiency. The weaponized anti-gravity fields were solving complex orbital mechanics problems that had stumped our best scientists for decades. Even the pudding catapult had accidentally discovered 3 new forms of non-Newtonian fluid dynamics. The memory crystal showed Dr. Rodriguez standing atop an overturned serving table, wielding a ladle like a scepter, her lab coat dramatically billowing in the wind from the malfunctioning atmospheric controls. Behold, she had shouted, the power of applied chaos theory. And then Kate Thorax's voice dropped to an almost inaudible whisper. She introduced something that would change galactic science forever. Something so fundamentally human that it defied all logical explanation. She called it the Mythbusters approach. Vex Laura's hover chair actually stuttered in midair. The what? A human entertainment program that combines scientific methodology with their inexplicable desire to make things explode. Dr. Rodriguez argued quite convincingly. I might add that by introducing controlled chaos into our experimental protocols, we could discover solutions that pure logic might miss. The hologram shifted to show a hastily assembled research station in what used to be the station's main cargo bay. They called it extreme experimental verification. The hypothesis was simple: if something works in an action movie, and you can explain it with sufficient scientific jargon, there's at least a 50% chance it will work in reality, especially if you add enough enthusiasm and dramatic background music. That's not how science works, Vex Laura protested. That's exactly what the council said. Right up until Marcus Chen successfully teleported a sandwich using nothing but rewired food synthesizer parts and what he called video game glitch exploitation theory. The memory crystal showed the historic moment: a simple nutrient disk simultaneously disappearing from one end of the cargo bay and reappearing at the other, accompanied by sound effects that Marcus had apparently added for dramatic flair. The equations, they made no sense. And yet, when you added in Dr. PHZC's rule of cool calculations and adjusted for what Dr. Rodriguez called narrative causality, everything suddenly worked. It was as if the humans had discovered a whole new branch of physics, one that operated on the principle that anything is possible if you approach it with sufficient creativity and a complete disregard for conventional limitations. Kate Thorax's tentacles twisted into complex shapes as he struggled to express the magnitude of what happened next. And then they decided to attempt something they called a season finale, because apparently all this chaos wasn't entertaining enough without a big finish. The memory crystal's image began to flicker erratically, as if the very memories were too chaotic to properly record. They combined everything: the modified gravity generators, the quantum coffee experiments, the action movie physics, the MacGyver improvisations, and something they called anime logic, which I still can't talk about without getting a headache. The season finale K-Thorax continued, his bioluminescent spots now pulsing in patterns that would give a seizure to anyone with fewer than 3 sets of eyes, began at exactly 3:47 station time. Why that specific time? Because, according to Marcus Chen, it's always 3:47 in action movies. The memory crystal struggled to display the scene, the holographic projection flickering and distorting as if the very memories were too chaotic to properly render. They called it Operation Physics? What physics? And yes, the question mark was apparently crucial to its success. Vex Laura's scales had shifted to a color that hadn't been documented in any xenobiological database, somewhere between existential dread and morbid fascination. What did they do? They decided to prove, once and for all, that Dr. PhZ's rule of cool was actually a fundamental force of the universe. K-Thorax's tentacles wrapped around his relaxation pods so tightly they left imprints. Dr. Rodriguez stood in the middle of the main research hub, now completely transformed into what they called an epic boss battle arena, and announced, and I quote, "Time to make science awesome." The hologram showed the scene in all its terrible glory. Dr. Rodriguez, wearing what appeared to be a lab coat modified with lead strips for dramatic effect, she'd insisted, standing atop a platform made of repurposed gravity generators. Marcus Chen had somehow rigged the station's announcement system to play something he called boss battle music, while Dr. PhZ existed in what appeared to be 17 dimensions simultaneously, still buzzing from residual caffeine. They had turned the entire station into what they called a Rube Goldberg machine of science, their emphasis, not mine. It started with a simple action. Dr. Rodriguez dropped a single coffee bean into a modified food synthesizer. K-Thorax's voice took on a tone of haunted awe. The coffee bean was replicated and quantum entangled by Dr. PhZ's caffeine-enhanced calculations, creating what they called a coffee cascade reaction. These energized particles then triggered the gravity generators, which Marcus had reprogrammed using principles from something called portal physics. The hologram showed waves of impossible energy cascading through the station. The gravity fields created a series of what humans call momentum loops, forbidden by every known law of physics, but somehow validated by the rule of cool. These loops fed into the hydroponics lab, where they'd set up what Dr. Rodriguez called a botanical accelerator using principles from both Jurassic Park and Speed. But why? Vex Laura's antennae were practically tied in knots. They claimed they were going to solve every major scientific problem facing the galaxy. Through the power of action movie climaxes and narrative inevitability, K-Thorax paused, his exoskeleton crackling with remembered static. And the most terrifying part? It worked. The memory crystal showed the cascade of events: the hydroponics experiment creating super-growing plants that could thrive in any environment, the modified food synthesizers achieving perfect matter energy conversion through what Marcus called Star Trek hand-waving, and Dr. PhZ's quantum coffee calculations somehow solving the unified field theory, though the proof only made sense if you read it while humming the theme from Mission Impossible. The station's AI, now fully committed to what it called its anime transformation sequence, began implementing their solutions across all systems. We had researchers literally surfing on waves of quantum probability, using modified gravity fields to redirect energy flows, and conducting experiments that should have been impossible but worked because, as Dr. Rodriguez put it, they looked really cool doing it. The hologram showed the final moment: the entire station briefly existing in what appeared to be a state of quantum superposition, with every experiment simultaneously succeeding and failing until, as Marcus Chen shouted, the rule of cool collapsed the probability wave into the most awesome possible outcome. When everything finally stabilized, K-Thorax continued, his voice filled with a mixture of terror and admiration, we discovered that they had accidentally done the impossible. They had created a working theory that unified classic physics, quantum mechanics, and what they called action movie logic into something they termed the grand unified theory of awesome. But why did the council classify everything? Vex Laura asked, her hover chair now maintaining a safe distance from K-Thorax's increasingly agitated tentacles. Because, K-Thorax replied solemnly, they realized that humans hadn't just broken the laws of physics, they had convinced physics itself to be more entertaining. The council feared that if this knowledge became widespread, the entire galaxy might start approaching problems the human way. With a combination of brilliant insanity, reckless creativity, and an unshakable belief that anything is possible with sufficient application of what they call movie magic. The memory crystal showed one final scene: Dr. Rodriguez and her team being escorted off the station, all of them wearing those terrifying human grins while Marcus Chen called out, "Wait until you see what we've got planned for the sequel." And that, K-Thorax concluded, slowly sinking back into his relaxation pod, is why every scientific conference now has a strict no human entertainment references policy, and why the phrases "that's like in the movies" or "wouldn't it be cool if" are banned in all research facilities across the galaxy. Vex Laura sat in stunned silence for a moment before asking, "But what happened to their discoveries?" K-Thorax's bioluminescent spots pulsed with a knowing glow. "Oh, they're all locked away in a secure facility, along with a complete collection of human action movies for security purposes, of course. And if sometimes late at night, certain high-ranking council members access those files for what they call research purposes. That's strictly classified." He leaned forward, all four eyes focusing intensely on Vex Laura. "Just remember this, young researcher, if you ever hear a human say the words 'I have an idea' followed by 'trust me, I saw this in a movie once', run as fast as your gravitational propulsion units can carry you." And what if running isn't an option? K-Thorax's mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. "Then do what I do, grab some popcorn, another terrifying human invention, and prepare to witness the impossible. Because if there's one thing that incident taught us, it's that humans don't just think outside the box, they convince the box that it never really existed in the first place. Usually while making something explode for dramatic effect." The end. Day.